So would you build your house on a foundation that you knew would crack in a couple of years? No, you wouldn't. But golfers try and build their golf swings on a setup position that's absolutely horrendous. So what I'm going to show you today is exactly why you need a fantastic setup before you start working on your actual golf swing. So come with me, let's talk about what makes a great setup and why it's beneficial to have one. So why is the setup something that we have to continuously work on? Well, the reasons are, you sit at a desk all day when you work. So what's going to happen is you're going to end up getting very slouchy. You're going to get very lazy when you go and you set up to your golf ball. What if you're playing in different conditions from day to day? Maybe one day it's windy. Or if it's windy, what you're likely to do is to try and keep that golf ball nice and low. So that alone changes your setup. Now, another common reason that you set up to the ball poorly is just because you play a lot of golf. Have you ever been away for a weekend of golf with your buddies and you play pretty good the first day? Maybe you don't play as good the next day, but then the following 2 or 3 days, you play horrendous. And the reason being is you have just not practiced at all, you haven't checked your setup, and quite frankly, everything's a little out of whack. So here's the most common setup position that I see, and trust me, it's not a good one. I see a lot of golfers who set up to their golf ball, perhaps the ball position's a little out of whack, but mainly I see a setup position where the left side of the body is lower than the right side, and this tilts my upper body towards the target too much. So this is the most common setup fundamental or setup issue that I see. So you might be wondering what's wrong with that setup. Well, the biggest issue with that setup is when golfers set up the left side down and the upper body tilting this way, the most common issue that I see from this type of setup position is the golfer can't rotate. The golfer will then start to tip over, they'll be very under-rotated, maybe we get a little bit of a slide or a sway pattern in the backswing, and ultimately the downswing then ends up being this look of trying to save it. We get really stuck underneath the golf ball and we hit behind it. Or what we're going to see from this setup from a down the line view is if everything tilts over towards the target, we see them get to the top without any depth to the golf swing, thus giving us a really easy opportunity to get this club over the top, hang back, slice the ball, stay on the back foot, etc. It's just awful ball striking when I see that issue in your setup position. So what do we want to see with your setup position? Well, let's start with stance width. If someone is too narrow with their stance width, the moment they start to take their golf club away and load that right side, they're likely going to fall over. The other end of the spectrum is that the feet are too wide. Now this is also an issue, because if my feet are too wide, again, golfers try to get their pressure over towards that right side. Now, notice what I just did there in order to get over to the right side. I had to move my entire body to the right of the golf ball. So now all of a sudden, I'm way too far behind the golf ball, especially with an iron. Notice my left foot has started to come off the ground because when my feet are so wide, I need to travel a long way over here towards the right, and that's what gets my left foot up in the air. So the stance width that I would like you to get into is pretty simple. I want to see at least 2 club heads inside your feet on either side of this alignment stick. So what this looks like is this. When I take my setup, I like to start with my feet together. And this gives me a really good opportunity to step the correct distance with our feet. So if I want a middle ball position, I'm going to take 2 medium, even steps, give myself a bit of a wiggle so I can get comfortable. And as you're going to see here, I have 2 club heads between the left foot and the alignment stick and the right foot and the alignment stick. And that's going to be a pretty simple way of getting into a good stance width position. Now, what if you wanted to go with a back ball position? Well, using the same method, we could take a bigger step with the left foot and a smaller step with the right foot. So all of a sudden, my stance width is still appropriate for the shot, but I'm able to change the ball position fairly simple. If I want the opposite, I would put my feet back together and I would little step, big step, and now all of a sudden I have a forward ball position. So that's pretty simple. How to get the correct stance width, very easy, 2 club heads between your feet when you've got that alignment stick in the middle of your feet. Now the next thing I want to see, and I just spoke about it, is our ball position. So players underestimate the importance of ball position. If your ball is back too far, the path is going to move in to out too much. If the ball position is too far forward, the path is going to move left too much and you're going to slice it. So ball back equals big hooks and blocks, and ball forward is going to equal big cuts and pulls. So given the fact that we've just spoken about the stance width, that goes hand in hand with the ball position. So if you think about it, when I put my feet together and I'm working on my stance width, I can also work on my ball position at the same time. So you can see here that my ball position is in the middle, and again, if I wanted to go back, I can have a big step, little step, or if I wanted to go forward, I can go small step, big step. And that's a simple way to get your stance width and your ball position in the right spot every time. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the amount of forward bend you have. Now, what does this mean? Forward bend is essentially this. How much are we hinging from our waist? So think about Mouque when she was putting, terrible looking putting posture, but she would get literally completely 90 degrees to the ground. I'm gonna snap my hamstrings if I do this anymore, but that was what Mouque looked like. I would say that's too much hip hinge or forward bend. What you can also see is players who don't have enough. So what we then see is they try and bend a little bit forwards, and then all of a sudden you can see the body is just too upright, and in order to get down to the ground, they're going to sink down and they look like they're on the toilet. So what we're looking for from our forward bend is to have an adequate amount. And the way that I would teach this is I want you to hold your golf club out in front of you like this, stand up nice and tall, and I want you to bend forward from the waist until the club head hits the ground. So we're going to just bend forward from the waist until the club head hits the ground, and then you can start to adjust yourself from there. And you can see there that my forward bend is adequate. It's in between the Mouque and then the player that stands up a little bit too tall. So we have that nice bit of forward bend, good stance width, good ball position, and we are most of the way there of building that perfect setup. So next up, we've got balance points. Now, what do I mean by balance points? I'm talking about toes, heels, and the middle of your feet, or essentially the balls of your feet. So what I see a lot of golfers do is they get too much into their toes. So when they set up to the golf ball, you'll see that when I ask them to get into forward bend, they typically don't bend forward this way, they actually just lean forwards that way. And what happens is they get too much on their toes at setup. Now, the big thing about this is it really affects the way that you rotate. So we don't want to be on our toes too much. Opposite to that, players get too much on their heels. So they take their setup and maybe they've been told to bend their knees. So all of a sudden they get into their setup position, maybe they've got a good amount of forward bend and they get told bend your knees, and all of a sudden looks like they're taking a little bit of a dump on the toilet. So what would be the perfect balance points? Where would our balance need to be in our feet? Well, here's a fun little exercise for you. I want you to set up in your toes. So I want you to get too much in your toes. You don't even need a golf club for this. I just want you to get too much in your toes. And what you're going to notice is my heels are off the ground. This would be considered too much in my toes. What I'm then going to do is get into my heels. So now I have my toes up off the ground and I can wiggle them. I'm now too much in my heels. So what do I want to do? I want to try and find the balance between the two. So when I take my setup, get into my forward bend, and I want to just find the balls of my feet. Now, typically what I see is right at the end shoelace is about where you want this to be. So a nice little exercise is to rock onto your toes, rock onto your heels, back onto the toes, back onto the heels, and then find that happy medium where you can't actually lift your toes, nor can you lift the heels. And all of a sudden what we're going to see with our setup is a nicely balanced setup position where I've got the pressure in the balls of my feet Not too much on the toes, not too much on the heels, but right on the balls of our feet. So the next part of the setup is our arm hang. Now, arm hang and balance points kind of come hand in hand. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we've got good arm hang, or if we've got good balance points within our feet and we've set up with the right amount of forward bend, what you're going to notice is my arms will just hang directly down from my shoulders. So when I'm nice and relaxed, you can see that they are hanging down directly in front or down from my shoulders. If I'm too much on my toes, what can possibly happen is I move forward, but my arms move into my body too much. So you'll see that the arms actually hang below my shoulders. If I get too much in the heels, I'm moving too far away from the golf ball, which means that my hands and arms need to sit outside my shoulders in order to reach the golf ball. So you can see how having the right amount of forward bend, the right balance points in our feet will actually give me a nice arm hang when I'm standing next to the ball. So if I take my golf club, get into my setup position with my nice forward bend, nice balance points, and you'll see here that my arm hang is pretty natural, straight down from my shoulders. I'm not in my heels with my arms out here, and I'm not over here with my hands in here. So you can see, pretty simple arm hang. And the one thing I give a lot of the players that I teach to teach them arm hang is actually grab a medicine ball, grab a heavy object. Something like a 5-pound medicine ball is a really good thing to grab. And the reason why it's so good is because it's quite heavy. We don't hold a medicine ball on the heels like this. We would bend forward from the waist and allow the medicine ball to drag my shoulders down for my arms to be directly down from my shoulders. And finally, the last two things that you need to understand is, remember at the start of this video where I said a lot of players who set up poorly have this look where the left side drips down, the right side gets high, and the upper body tilts towards the target. Well, we're going to rectify that right now with a little bit of spine tilt away from the target. So think about when you hit a driver, you typically have the ball forward and we tilt our body to the right of that driver. Now, we're going to do this with an iron, but just a very small amount. We want to have just a small amount so that we don't have this look at setup anymore. So all we're going to do is take our setup. I like to hold the club horizontal to the ground, and then what I want to feel like I do is I bump my left hip forward, tilt my upper body back, and then put the club back down on the ground. Now, a good reference point for whether or not you were doing this correctly is if you were to draw a line directly up from my golf ball, you'll see that my pelvis, my chest, and the left ear is almost in one line, there or thereabouts. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you can see that that is in a pretty good setup position. And last but not least, we've got a little bit of shaft lean to add at the end of all of this. So once we're in that setup position, we obviously don't want to lean the shaft backwards. We want to have a little bit of shaft lean here. My rule of thumb is to have no more than what my left arm is. So if you can line up your left arm and your shaft at setup, we're going to be in a pretty good spot. We don't want to have excessive shaft lean where we push the shaft forward. So push the lower body forward, upper body back, and have a little bit of shaft lean. Now, if you struggle to find out how much exactly you need, a very, very simple drill is to place this golf club in the middle of your chest, take your setup position, tilt ever so slightly to the right, and you're going to see that the club head hits my inner thigh of my left leg, and that's about as much spine tilt as you want with your iron. And there we go. We are in a very, very effective and strong setup position. So if you are wondering, is that setup the same with all clubs? Is it the same with a driver and an iron? If you're not sure, I want you to watch the video that's on your screen right now, where I talk about the differences between a driver swing and an iron swing.